Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability. ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Kick off summer with Memorial Day savings at Lowe's. Right now, get 5 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. Plus, get up to 40% off select major appliances and save an extra $50 on every $500 you spend on select major appliances $396 or more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/28. Mulch offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Welcome to Those Days, a retrospective on Michinoku Pro. Episode 5, the 1994 Super J Cup. Those Days is brought to you by Open the Voice Gate and the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find Those Days on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network feed or on the dedicated Open the Voice Gate feed, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on social media at Open Voice Gate. If you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing site. You click the red box and that says sponsor this podcast, and you can set up a one-time or reoccurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, joined alongside your other host, Case Lowe. And Case, we instantly, after 1994 kicks off, and we have Michinoku in Tokyo and everything that kind of spins off of that. And we now have what becomes one of the biggest moments in junior wrestling history in the Super J Cup first stage that we will be talking about this week.
I mean, this is going to be the most consequential episode that we do in this entire series, and we're planning on taking this series, possibly, up until J Cup 2000. But I would say, and this might sound hyperbolic to some, but I think wrestling as we know it changed forever based off the show that we're going to talk about. And because these shows, the ones that we're recording, there can be a gap between some of the episodes. Again, we're getting you at least one a month, but it's been a month since the last one. I feel like it's worth just very quickly regrouping here. This is episode 5, the first 3 episodes dedicated to 1993, the foundation of Michinoku Pro, the local promotion that Sasuke did to get regional wrestling off the ground at all in Japan. And then you go to the summer of 1993 and you have the Delphin versus Sasuke match outside in July. That is sort of a proof of concept of, hey, this is what Michinoku Pro Wrestling can be. You start to see the formation of a partnership with FMW. And by the end of 1993, Onita's involved. Last time we did Those Days, we talked about Michinoku Pro's debut in Cork and Hall. We solved a 30-year-old mystery as to what happened with the promoter of that show and why Michinoku Pro Wrestling never got paid. And we ended with a double KO finish, a Jinsei Shinzaki versus Great Sasuke singles match that generated quite a bit of buzz, not only in Japan, but in America. And so as we come into this episode, I think it's really important to note that there's Michinoku Pro before everything we're talking about here And then there is Michinoku Pro with everything after the matches we're going to talk about on this show. And I think it's a fair assessment, even for the minor successes that they saw in 1993 and the beginning of 1994. Mike, there is no Those Days series. There is no ECW six-man. There is no legacy of Michinoku Pro without Super J Cup 1994. And it's why I think you and I both feel the need to break down this show in the detail that we're going to, because although it's a New Japan sponsored event, it is inherently the most important thing to ever happen to Michinoku Pro Wrestling.
Right, because we enter this time period, and I think it's worth noting that at least for Michinoku Pro and Great Sasuke, a lot of the PR and a lot of the publicity access was granted at least in 1993 because of their relationship with first Wally Yamaguchi and then Sasuke finding a kindred spirit in a way in Onita and the media gadfly that he was. But this is an important moment because Super J Cup, not even just for Michinoku Pro, but for Great Sasuke, this launches what would be the period of his most success. And this, especially as it relates to Japan of itself, well, we're talking about a time period where, so Super J Cup, and we'll get into the lead up to it, is on April 16th, 1994. But already in 1994, you have that Tokyo show that was cover of Weekly Pro Wrestling. Sasuke is someone that, as we talk about 1994, and especially the first few months of it, he goes from one level. Then by the time that we are getting to the end of 1994, he is not just like this local indie name that's kind of become interesting as a quirk because of, hey, he's the one who decided to do wrestling out of Tokyo. He becomes almost as popular of a wrestling national figure, and a lot of that is based off of the show that we're talking about, as popular as Jushin Thunder Liger in some circles coming off of this show. It catapults him to another level of superstardom.
Media darling, is I think the term that would be apt here, because he saw in 1993 the way that Onita formed relationships with these magazines and these publications, and he saw what that did for Onita, and Sasuke partners with him. And I don't want to say he takes it up to an entirely different level, because ultimately, Onita has the houses that he has on his resume, and those are as impressive as anybody else's. But Sasuke goes down a different path doing the same thing. And it's quite remarkable. It's funny. We try to keep these as evergreen as possible, because I certainly like the idea of somebody listening to these years after we've recorded them. But we're recording this about a week since Sabu passed, and analyzing the Great Sasuke in 1994 is incredibly similar to analyzing Sabu in 1994. And when we finish off this calendar year and we go over the Observer Awards, it's funny now with 30 years of distance, where you'll see, Kobashi, Masawa, Benoit, Liger, and the names next to them are Sabu and Sasuke. People that had these lengthy legendary careers and became these iconic figures in wrestling, but were far different in the grand scheme of things than a Masawa, Kobashi, a Hashimoto, guys like that. But their 1994s are very similar, because Sasuke, he cleans up just as much as Sabu does in the year-end awards. Before we get into the timeline of the Super J Cup, and again, we're going to talk about Super J Cup 1994, and we're going to break down the April 29th, 1994 Michinoku Pro show from Ota Ward City Gymnasium. I want to do just a brief overview of what your relationship is, Mike, with J Cup 94. Do you remember the first time you heard about it? Had you seen this show before? Do you remember watching this show for the first time? I'm just curious, bird's eye view, what your relationship is like with J Cup.
So it's actually and kind of funny talking about this after, on VoiceGate talking about Sabu, and especially hearing Joe and Rich's 3-hour obit on Sabu, just because of how people would get wrestling footage, especially in that internet era, but kind of like, especially when you're talking about like 1994, essentially it's news groups and mailing lists at that time. I got into this show a lot later because I was able to really get into a deeper wrestling fandom through file sharing. It was a different generation than what like Joe's talking, and we'll be talking about tape traders of 1994 in that era. But I mean, I was someone that other than like music videos on MV Zone, a lot of this wrestling for me, at least from when I was first exposed to it, was stuff that you were able to find on your Kazals and LimeWires. And then also later on, I don't know if you remember of this website, The Ditch. The Ditch was,
of course,
especially as someone who, I mean, we're talking about just like 2003, 2004, someone who's only now getting like higher speed internet than 57K, 56K. Like, case it used to be real bad to get anything on the internet. Like, it was just that slow. And being able to be in a dorm and being able to like download stuff from The Ditch. Like, I would say I don't explicitly remember the first time I came in contact with Super J Cup 94, but I would have to say it was probably off of the Ditch website in the mid 2000s, like a decade after that path. And to be quite honest, for a lot of me in Super J Cup up until this, it was picking and choosing the matches I wanted to see. Of course, seeing like Black Tiger versus Wild Pegasus, of course, and then like the finals. But I was not making time for Gato and Ricky Fuji when I was like initially doing this. So this was watching it from like start to finish as a complete show for this episode. This is the first time I've done that, though. Matches of this I would have seen because of like the Ditch and file sharing in the 2000s.
I had never seen this show in full before. In fact, I had never seen anything beyond the first round of this show. And it's, you know, one of those things that feels so obvious that I think I just told myself, oh, eventually I'll watch it. And then that just eventually never happened until recording for this podcast. I remember, and I don't know if you were ever a big listener of this. Was there ever a point in time when you really cared about Colt Cabana's podcast?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like Colt Cabana's podcast, especially from when it was like lifted, like in the late 2000s and early 10s. I mean, like I was deeply into that, especially if it was someone like he would get somehow like Reckless Youth to come out and do those shows. Like those were the ones I was like super into.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't know perspective wise if that's something that a lot of people really cared about, or if I just really, really cared about it when I started listening to it and put a level of importance on that podcast that isn't necessarily there. But I would have started listening to Cabana's podcast late 2012, early 2013. And I would say through 2015-ish, when he started to slow down a little bit, Thursday morning, it was, you know, if I was awake at midnight, if it was, you know, the summer when I was in, you know, junior high and high school, it was refreshing at midnight to listen to it. If not, it was listing them as soon as I got up on the bus, walking to school, whatever it was, in my Tweaked Audio earbuds, which I haven't thought about Tweaked Audio, which was Colt Cabana's earbud sponsor until just this now for, you know, probably a decade since I've thought about Tweaked Audio. But that was, for me, in so many ways, my gateway into, obviously, World of Sports, something that Cabana was super passionate about. You know, learning who Prince Devitt was on that show, learning who Pac was on that show. You know, it was the ultimate seal of approval. It was, for somebody that was getting into indie wrestling at the time, it was no different than a comedian in the 80s doing stand-up on Johnny Carson and then getting invited over to the couch. Like, if you were on Art of Wrestling and you were good, you had my full support. I would buy a pro wrestling t-shirt. I would go see you at a show. Doesn't matter what it was. I'd figure out a way to support those guys. And I don't remember who the episode was. And that was bugging me. I was trying to figure it out this week. I feel like it might have been Eddie Edwards. It was somebody that worked a lot in Japan, that had a passion for Japanese wrestling, that was talking to Cabana about Super J-Cup 1994. And they both spoke of it in such reverence of like, oh, everybody's seen J-Cup. You got to see J-Cup. It's the greatest show of all time. And this would have been pre-New Japan World. So whatever I heard that day on the bus, I went home and fired it up on YouTube, Super J-Cup 1994. And sure enough, somebody had an entire upload of J-Cup on YouTube. And then I watched, you know, the first round of the tournament, and I went, this is fine. Like, you know, this is wrestling that I would see on like a Sinclair era Ring of Honor show. There's nothing special about this. And I exited it out, and 12 years later, I hadn't seen the show until just now, despite watching the 95 J-Cup in full multiple times and the 2000 J-Cup in full multiple times, and seeing the hype matches from 2004 and 2009. And then when they brought it back in 2016, I was the one doing coverage on that for voicesofwrestling.com, both night one and night two. And it's a show. Those shows were train wrecks, but I hold them near and dear to my heart. I did all of that without ever saying 1994 in full until just now.
Yeah, and I think that especially when you like list like 2011, 2012, like discovering like uh cult show, I have a very vivid image. I was working at a film archive and that had a super cold vault, which was very expensive to do in Miami, Florida, and remembering getting my fleece jacket out and putting in Art of Wrestling to put back tapes and films and all of that. Like there's a very like kind of strong image that I have for that. And I think that when you like are talking about like 1994 and also just like how this all kind of came together, like you're talking about a time that in recent memory, at least within Japan, you had like Bridge of Dreams and like this, but not really anything as focused as this one.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment as well. So I think there's another conversation about the legacy of J-Cup 94 that we'll have after talking about this show, because I think watching it in 2025 eyes with no nostalgia for, say, receiving the tape in the mail and watching it as, quote, one of the greatest wrestling shows ever is a really fascinating experience. I was in a lot of different ways blown away by what I saw, some good, some bad. So we'll talk about that after the show. But Mike, let's get into the timeline of Super J-Cup 1994 and, of course, April 29th, 1994 Michinoku Pro. We'll start here with an excerpt from igapro.com. This is a great website. It's a Japanese wrestling blog. They do modern coverage, and they do a lot of historical articles as well. I use this website a lot when I was writing my Grant Hamada obituary. It's igapro24.com.
Yeah.
That is igapro24.com.
Yeah, and especially if you're looking at something that's away from like your weekly pro or Tokyo sports, just for our Dragon Gate fans, Iga Pro was one of the few ones that actually touched Okamura's death.
Yes.
So I find Iga Pro like a really indispensable resource, especially if you're trying to get stuff that's outside of the Japanese media machine.
So, luckily for us, they have an entire blog dedicated to how Super J-Cup 1994 came to be. And in that blog, it reads, at the end of 1993, a magazine published by Nikon Sports Publishing held a roundtable discussion with junior heavyweight wrestlers at the time. The roundtable discussion included Jushin Thunder Liger, El Samurai, Shinjiro Otani, and the third Tiger Mask, who was Koji Kanemoto from New Japan Pro Wrestling, as well as Ultimo Dragon and Masao Orihara from WAR, Ricky Fuji and Choden Senshin Battle Ranger from FMW, and the Great Sasuke and Super Delphin from Michinoku Pro Wrestling. From this roundtable discussion, Liger came up with the idea of holding an all-star show with junior heavyweights, and the wrestlers who participated responded, "We'd love to do that." But everyone except Liger only replied as a polite gesture. Liger was serious about this plan and made great strides to do so. This was the beginning of Super J-Cup. As a boy, Liger was one of the people who attended Pro Wrestling Dream All-Star match live in August 1979, and since promotions would be cautious about holding an all-star show in the heavyweight division, he had been planning for some time whether it would be possible to hold an all-star show in the junior heavyweight division. Liger immediately brought his plan to New Japan Pro Wrestling, and Katsuji Nagashima, a close aide to on-site manager Riki Choshu, who was particularly enthusiastic, and the two of them began working to hold the Super J-Cup. However, Liger did not first consult with New Japan Pro Wrestling, but instead consulted with his wife, Chikagi, who was a fan of indie wrestling and would often introduce wrestlers to Liger by saying this was amazing, and Liger would really lean on her throughout this entire process. So we'll pause there for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
I love, just as we are in such a post-press universe, magazines, bygone era, not a thing anymore. I first of all love the idea of rounding up the best junior heavyweights at the end of 1993 and going, talk to me about the junior heavyweight wrestling scene. A novel concept that I don't really think can be emulated in today's media, which is just so sad. Also,
well, we do get a little bit of that case, though. Shoe Pro and Weekly Sports, they will get like young wrestlers at the end of the year, like across that, to kind of talk about their next year. And when they do era changes, I remember like a huge thing about getting together for that, but specifically junior heavyweight wrestling, not as much so, but you do see some of it within Japanese media today.
But they're still hanging on to magazines. I guess this is an American problem where it's just like, oh, we have, What are you going to do? Go on the AEW podcast and talk about junior heavyweight wrestling? I don't know. I don't know if that's their plan on the media front there. I also love that Liger is essentially Jerry Jarrett forming TNA in this conversation where,
Oh, yeah.
What's the quote? Like, everybody thought this was just fishing talk, but Jerry was all business. It's like Liger's like, I'm not fucking with you guys. I'm going to do an all-star junior show and you guys are going to be on it.
Listen, me and my wife, we watch a lot of wrestling. We decided we want to do this. And I always find, like, whenever Liger and his wife kind of come up, like, how interesting of a relationship the two of them have. Because, like, Chicago Liger, I don't know what the proper family name is, but Mrs. Liger has always kind of been a true one to pro wrestling, like, to the extent of not having a single issue that Liger decides to live in the dojo. Like into his 50s, like
I didn't know he was married until I started doing research for this. I hadn't come across her before.
Oh yeah,
it actually makes Liger's life way more interesting because he was living in the dojo that long and things like that.
Right? Yeah. No, like his wife and son were the ones that were like bawling at his retirement. Like it was like seeing like like I remember like something like her saying like, yeah, I guess he'll finally be home now. And his son it's like very clear that he had the wrestling gene, like he was a fan of it, but there's not going to be another great super junior heavyweight coming out of that family line just bawling for his dad. Yeah, no, the Liger family rules.
We go to the January 3rd, 1994 Wrestling Observer newsletter. So we're fully in 1994 at this point. And Dave writes, on the 1225 New Japan show at Corkin, Liger did a Q&A session with the audience and said that they'd be doing a junior heavyweight tournament next year. And he wanted to bring in guys from the smaller Japanese promotion for the tournament. And mentioned specifically that he wanted a match against the great Sasuke. Right now, Sasuke's group is tied up with FMW. So it was surprising for Liger to talk about having a match against someone in a small group and giving them that credibility.
So,
Mike, that goes back to what we were talking about at the top of the show.
Right. Yeah. And especially with like the relationship with FMW, I would be interested of when Dave was like, oh, okay, now Liger is actually really kind of doing that together. Like it feels like within weeks he kind of drops that aspect of it, but in a way, if there was going to be any issues, like as we went through last week, like they pretty much drop FMW at the end of 1993, and it picks up again later into the year. But if there was going to be like any sort of consternation, Michinoku Pro already was free and clear of FMW at that time.
As we go through the rest of 1994, which will take a few episodes to do, but there's mention of FMW in our next episode with Sasuke being tied to FMW more so than Michinoku Pro. And then by the end of 94, you obviously have the Sasuke Onita match, which we'll cover in detail. But
and I guess you have the IJ title, which is nominally FMW's title.
Dave, I think coming up, Dave actually refers to it as the title that's shared between FMW and Michinoku Pro. But you see here, whatever success Michinoku had with FMW, it's irrelevant by the time the calendar turns to 1994. Liger has seen enough. Liger wants his claws in Michinoku Pro, and it's part of the reason that the Super J Cup even exists in the first place, which we'll talk about. We continue here, January 24th, 1994 Observer. Dave writes, WAR ran a big angle on the January 16th show at Corkin Hall. After Ultimo Dragon and Ashura Hara upset Ishin Riki and Junichiro Tenryu, Gato and Jado, who were the top native tag team for Wing, suddenly showed up and attacked Dragon, with Tenryu making the save. Tenryu then announced after the match that Gato and Jado would join WAR for the next tour to feud with Dragon. The one who was most surprised by this was Wing booker Victor Quinones, who was at the show live and saw his top tag team appearing with a rival group. Apparently, the two were upset about money being late, although apparently they had recently been paid, and Jado made the comment to the Wing promoter that he would like to join WAR, but they didn't think he meant this soon. And a major surprise on the January 14th show in Yokohama, Ishin Riki retained the UWA middleweight title, pinning Ultimo Dragon in 1816. Jushin Thunder Liger was at the show and congratulated Ishin Riki after the win. New Japan later this year is doing a junior heavyweight tournament with the gimmick that Liger will be picking the members himself from many different promotions, and was there scouting the two WAR wrestlers. Mike, this only means something to us in a post-2021 Dragon Gate universe in which Ishin Riki's sons both wrestled for the promotion, now just one of Ishin Riki's sons. We almost had Ishin Riki and J-Cup 94.
Yeah, and I think that maybe as we start talking about the groups that get kind of lumped in, WAR is at an interesting spot here in 1994. Wing is not doing well. Like we've covered how much like some of the deathmatch promotions were just not drawing great at Korakuen, like them and like Pro Wrestling Crusaders. War was able to kind of, through Ultimo and still having Tenryu and setting things up explicitly to have people versus Tenryu, had a longer lifeline. And of course, they did have a little bit of a payment from Megane Super. But it was in 94, like the juniors that they would want to push would be Ultimo when Ultimo was in from CMLL. Yep, they would have been CMLL at this point.
Yes.
And as well as Ishin Riki, who, when he debuted and was kind of promoted, like, it was as Showa era as possible, taking this very well-known and fashionable celebrity that was a sumo that was known for being like the lightest sumo with kind of Hollywood looks but great technique. This provided like a great line for WAR, at least for like a native star, because when you think about WAR, especially in 94, a lot of your thoughts are towards the foreigners that have come through. And especially like up until like 96, it's a lot more talk about like, oh yeah, Jericho is through there, Lance Storm, people like that. It's not necessarily the native locker room becomes a figure point, but with Giotto and Gato jumping over at this point, they kind of become, at least until they get a little bit more involved with FMW, this becomes their home for a good long period as guys who didn't really have a home after Universal closed.
In 92 and 93, WAR is essentially acting as a subsidiary for New Japan. Now, if you've never seen that stuff, it's some of the very best wrestling to come out of Japan in the 90s. And that's obviously a very high bar, but the New Japan WAR feud is fantastic. What happens is WAR wants to split away from New Japan because, again, they felt like they were being treated as a subsidiary, and they end up linking up with FMW in 1994, and they do the Tenryu Onita match, but that cuts off the relationship with New Japan completely. And so they're very much in an awkward spot here. They feel a little bit, too big to be an indie, too small to be an actual prospering promotion. And to kind of go back to the point we were talking about at the beginning of this, where, the reason we're doing a Michinoku Pro podcast is largely in part of the impact that Super J Cup had. I mean, the difference between Michinoku and WAR is that Michinoku had a globally defining event like Super J Cup. WAR had a bunch of cool matches in the 90s.
Right. And just the overall situation of WAR from SWS and how not media friendly it was perceived when you contrast that with Michinoku Pro that just goes media. Why not? We love media. It really kind of puts things into a little bit of stark contrast. Because like you look at the WAR juniors at that time, and we'll talk about this as we move into February. Ultimo, Ishin Riki, Jado and Gato, and then Masao Orihara. That's a strong 5-person core that they were offering, but it kind of just gets kind of whittled away. And I think a lot of that has to do with WAR's awkward position in the industry.
I'll rifle through a month's worth of observers here, some notes on the J Cup. We start February 7th, 1994. Dave writes, Liger is already making plans for the April Top of the Super Juniors tournament. So this is what would become Best of Super Juniors, not J Cup specifically. But I mention this here because Dave writes that Liger's in charge of putting it together and that people should expect a lot of small promotion wrestlers such as Great Sasuke, Super Delphin, Jinsei Shinzaki, and Ricky Fuji to appear. The next week in The Observer, this is February 14th, 1994. 6 weeks later in the same building, as Dave is talking about the heavyweight scene in New Japan here, he writes, 6 weeks later in the same building will be a major interpromotional show hosted by New Japan, a one-night junior heavyweight tournament put together by Jushin Thunder Liger called All-Star Battle 94. The show is set for 4/16 with names to be expected on the show, such as New Japan Shinjiro Otani, El Samurai, Liger, Wild Pegasus, and Black Tiger, as well as WAR's Ultimo Dragon, Orihara, Ishin Riki, Gato, and Jado, FMW's Battle Ranger and Ricky Fuji, Michinoku Pro's Great Sasuke and Super Delphin, UWA's Gran Hamada, and PWFG's Yuki Ishikawa. He would then follow up on 221 and say there is talk of Sabu being brought in for that tournament. And on 228, Dave notes that it seems Sabu will appear at the 4/16 New Japan All-Star Junior Festival show, which is the same day, by the way. Think about this. Super J Cup 1994 happens on the same day as the Champion Carnival Finals in 1994 in Budokan Hall. Both shows sold out, and the reason I bring this up is for two reasons. One, obviously there's no All Japan representation on J Cup 94. What I read was that New Japan and Liger specifically actually extended the offer to All Japan and said, would you like to participate? And All Japan gave them that, hey, this is not our thing. No, thank you. Good luck with your own deal. But it's worth noting that on that show, on that All Japan show, there was a 12-minute Yoshinari Ogawa versus Yoshi Kikuchi match, which, it could just be All Japan undercard fodder, but it doesn't seem like it's an accident that All Japan would have a 12-minute singles match with their two best junior heavyweight wrestlers, while across town, New Japan is doing J Cup 94.
Yeah, like that seems pretty pointed, but just so everyone can kind of think about it, a combined about 28,000 people were at these two shows at the same time.
Not bad.
Kind of wild to think about in 2025 eyes in Tokyo.
Yeah, Champion Carnival Final, for reference, Kawada versus Steve Williams, which is a doozy of a match if you have not seen it. Dave would write on March 7th, 94 in The Observer that the winner of this tournament would receive Tatsumi Fujinami's old WWF Junior Heavyweight Championship belt and would be billed as Super Junior Cup Champion. That's just a fun anecdote there. And then we get to the March 21st Observer with the full lineup, in which Dave writes, New Japan held a press conference on March 13th in Tokyo to announce the lineup for the All-Star Junior Tournament, which takes place on 4/16 at the already sold-out Sumo Hall. So this is a month in advance, and that show's already sold out. While using wrestlers from several promotions to make this a unique venture, and there are some great wrestlers involved and should provide top matches, there is some disappointment with the lineup because of three names not involved: Ultimo Dragon, Gran Hamada, and Sabu. I'm not sure the circumstances of Sabu, who had been talked about at length as a possible participant, or Dragon, who it seemed like was a sure thing, but at the press conference, the company did announce that Hamada had turned them down. This leaves it as a 13-man tournament with Jushin Liger, who is booking the tournament, El Samurai, Shinjiro Otani, and Wild Pegasus and Black Tiger representing New Japan, Negro Casas representing EMLL, Masao Orihara representing WAR, Ricky Fuji representing FMW, Hayabusa representing the Tijuana-based WWA, Great Sasuke, Super Delphin, and Taka Michinoku representing Michinoku Pro Wrestling, and Masayoshi Motegi representing SPWF. Quick note on SPWF, that was Yoshiaki Yatsu's
Right.
Would you like a backyard promotion? It's
about it came out of SWS, right? Like when we talked about previously about how SWS completely splintered, and you had WAR, which was the Tenryu side, and then the two other camps ended up with now Network of Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Crusaders. There was further disintegration of there, and Yatsu ends up running SPWF out of that.
But I don't think I've ever seen SPWF footage exist.
It's mainly like Yatsu or Motegi, like I've seen it on like Lynch lists. I haven't like wanted to buy that. I feel like if you buy an SPWF tape from like somewhere in like a back alley in Chiba, you get put on a list. So I avoided that one.
The only historical note I have on SPWF, and I wrote about this in 2023, but when Genki Horiguchi was trying to break into the pro wrestling business, he tried to get into the SPWF dojo, and they actually rejected him. And so that is how he ended up in Ultimo Dragon's gym in Nakapon. So thank you to Yoshiaki Yatsu for not saying anything to Genki Horiguchi.
And that made Genki Horiguchi's mom's day.
That's right. I wrote about this. It's a very interesting story. It's Hage, the enduring legacy of Genki Horiguchi on voicesofwrestling.com, but Genki Horiguchi's mom did not want him to become a pro wrestler at all. She's the one that fielded the phone call from Yatsu saying that Horiguchi didn't get into the dojo, and then she laughed at her son and was like, see, you're not going anywhere. You're staying home with me. And
you have to run my shop in Kunamoto with me,
yes. And he said, I'm going to fly to Mexico and get away from you. A few historical notes on the guys that aren't in this tournament. Sabu, Hamada, Ishin Riki, Ultimo Dragon, some notable names there not involved. Our friend and everybody's friend Roy Lucier at some point asked Ultimo Dragon why he wasn't in the first J-Cup, and Ultimo replied, one-word answer, politics. Mike, do you think this means that Ultimo Dragon wasn't winning, thus he didn't want to be in it?
Yeah, no, Ultimo's not putting anyone over in 94. Like, the only person that he would probably, out of this list, put over is Liger, and he would still be asking money, please, for that. Like, no. And I think when we talk about what happened to Hamada and Sabu, you also get a level of that happening as well. Yeah, no, Ultimo just, like, he was getting paid pretty well with WAR. He was making great money in Mexico. He's about to stare down that WCW payday, man, and he is not at a time that he's putting people over if he didn't have to.
The other note here is Brett, the FMW historian, who I'm going to lean on heavily when we talk about Hayabusa, because he's obviously done such great work here. He has a photo on his Twitter of the original J-Cup poster, which I assume would have been used in like subways and then windows as a way to get people to buy tickets. But he knows...
Oh, yeah, just general promoter posters, yeah.
Yes, that poster had Orihara, it had Flying Kid, Ichihara, and Battle Ranger on it. It also had Dick Togo, all caps
Right.
Sato still at the time. So we're looking at a possible tournament. Could have had Sabu, could have had Ultimo, could have had Hamada, and could have had Dick Togo, and this show still ended up being as good as it was.
Yeah, like, you could pretty much have a second junior heavyweight tournament with the people that just did not end up being on this show, and arguably it would be as good as the tournament that we had.
Dave goes over the bracketing in the April 4th, 1994 Observer. The bracketing was announced for the 416 Sumo Hall All-Star Junior Wars card, with Great Sasuke having a bye into the quarterfinals against the winner of Motegi versus El Samurai. Other first-round matches in the top half of the bracketing include Ricky Fuji of FMW versus Negro Casas of MLL. Hayabusa, who Dave notes is from FMW, but it's funny, he's representing WWA. Dave has a parentheses here, he's also representing AAA against Jushin Thunder Liger. This is because at the time, Hayabusa was on excursion and wasn't getting any work. He was supposed to go over there and work AAA. AAA doesn't really want him. We'll talk about what happens with him in Mexico after this tournament in just a minute. And then he goes over the other matches, notably Dean Malenko versus Masao Orihara. That does not happen because Orihara gets hurt and Gato's the one that takes his place.
Right, yeah, and I guess Dean, in order not to have 3 first-round buys, he gets added between that tournament press conference on the 21st and then April 4th. So he gets added.
That's a good point. I didn't even think that Malenko's not in the original press conference, but he is.
No,
he's not, but he's in the tournament.
Right, yeah, which makes me think when we were going down this list, I was going like, no, those are all guys that ended up being in the tournament. And then I was like, okay, who is it? Oh, it's Dean. And then I guess really, like, you could obviously justify Pegasus getting the bye because he won Best of the Super Juniors in 93. So that makes sense. And I guess Sasuke, because of the IJ title or being Sasuke at this point, like, this is before Sasuke gets that level of respect, though.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess that's because he is the IJ champion, technically.
Well, look, the tournament was built around making Great Sasuke a star. And it becomes apparent in the aftermath that Liger was going to do whatever he could. And in putting Sasuke in a situation, especially given how Sasuke works and, just the, I don't know if the lack of cardio is the right term, but just for how physical his style was, having him wrestle 3 matches in one night instead of 4 couldn't have worked out better for Sasuke. He still has legs underneath him by the time he gets to the Benoit match.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And then if you think about this, like, and we'll talk about after the 29th, what a 2-week period Sasuke puts on his body. So, like, there's a lot of credence to say, hey, Sasuke is kind of crash and burn wrestler. Let's take one of the matches off his plate. So if he's going to crash and burn, it's going to be, he'll be able to get through the night, at least.
Some other notes here about the lineup. And again, all this FMW stuff is going to come from Brett because he did such a good job sort of chronicling their role here in this tournament. FMW pulled Sabu because they did not want him to lose in the first round. This is still a year before Sabu jumps to New Japan. So he's an FMW wrestler and a pushed FMW wrestler. That makes sense. Hayabusa said that he was afraid Riki Choshu would kick him out of the tournament on the day of the show if he found out that Hayabusa was, quote, a student wrestler. Mike, I know this is an interest of yours. You have the floor to talk about student wrestling.
Yep. Welcome to Mike's corner here. I thought we would be having this conversation when we got into Best of the Super Juniors this year, Case, but it turns out Hayabusa lets us kind of do this ahead of time. So what was wrestling in Japan outside of New Japan and All Japan? in the 80s and in the various like New Japan choreo and like produced shows. Well, there was wrestling that existed. It was not just Pioneer Jinshi in 89 kicking everything off there. There was kinds of wrestling that I would best say kind of translates more so towards the North American and Western wrestling term of backyarding. But there's a couple versions of this, and Hayabusa being a student wrestler is one of those big taboos that no longer exists. And a lot of the reason why it no longer exists is because of Hiroshi Tanahashi being a student wrestler, to be quite honest, because it still was something that was not talked of, because for the longest time, student wrestling was basically high school, but more so university clubs that usually call themselves like a professional wrestling survey or analysis club. And it would, and club culture at, in Japanese schools is a lot stronger, where like you join a club and that's basically your extracurricular at that time. And as it went into, as it went into like university, these clubs would kind of branch out in a lot of different ways. There would be like fan clubs that they would be like, if a show was coming to your university town, they would either have like some participation or go out as a group for that. A lot of people who would become pro wrestlers would join these clubs, and they would be like kind of training with people within the club, preparing themselves for the traditional dojo exams. You would have that, but the real scarlet letter of student wrestling was the fact that these organizations would put on shows and these people would wrestle. And that was seen as just such a forbidden thing in Japan up until essentially the mid-90s. And we will encounter this again when Terry Boy shows up into New Japan, because he was a student wrestler, that there's not a lot of respect given between traditional pro wrestlers and those who come from a student wrestling background. A lot of instances of concrete matches, using a term that we had a couple months ago, would erupt of this. Interestingly enough, you know who was the one, a real old-time guy who was kind of protective of student wrestling case?
I do not know.
Giant Baba. Baba, not that he liked it, but Baba was known for like teaching some of these people before a class how to take a bump, how to do kemi, and basically did this because, my God, if someone breaks their neck, the rest of the industry is going to look so down on us that people broke the neck. So I feel a level of ownership. So Baba ended up like teaching some of these college wrestlers the bump at this. But in the 90s, and really, I would argue up until really Hiroshi Tanahashi superstardom, coming from a student wrestler background, it just was one of those things that even after this point, a lot of pro wrestlers will hide their student or amateur wrestling background just because of that. And the other side of this is like the backyard promotions like JWA, which was a big grouping that included JWA Kansai, which for regular VoiceGate listeners might be aware of, because both Shima Masato Yoshino came from that side.
That's what I was going to ask. I knew Shima did. I was forgetting who the other guy was.
But Masato Yoshino, then later Soma Takao, was actually a college wrestler who used a Shima gimmick, and that kind of was led on to like their kind of thing whenever they were working together in DDT. It was based off of that. And that's only really within the last decade where people are this open about this sort of thing. So yeah, no, Hayabusa is rightfully terrified that Riki Choshu like entering a point where he's basically going to be there up until Yuke's he is as old school as it gets, and would not stand for it if Hayabusa was found out that Eiji Isaki was a student wrestler.
And it just plays into the bizarreness of Hayabusa even being in this tournament, because he's the least known name out of all these guys. And I did not realize until I watched the show and did the research, I didn't realize the debut of the Hayabusa character was in the J Cup. I for whatever reason did not know that. So, he had been wrestling in FMW for a few years under his real name. They sent him to Mexico, and he's not getting any work in Mexico. He's hanging out there. He's training when he can, but AAA is not booking him. There's not a ton of work on the indies. He's just sort of in Mexico, and he gets a call from Shochi Arai, who would end up being the president of FMW at the time. He was just an office guy, but he gets a call from Arai saying that Onita wanted him to be in this junior show. And Hayabusa is like, no, I'm not ready. Call Onita back, say that I don't want to do it. And he gets a call back from Arai, and Onita's like, saying Onita isn't giving you a choice. You have to come back to Japan. You have to work this show. So he ends up flying back to Japan. He's on a first-class flight to Narita with Ultimo Dragon, and the entire flight, Hayabusa is just babbling to Ultimo about, like, I'm not ready for this. I don't know what they're thinking. I'm going to fall flat on my face. And at one point he asked, because he's working in Mexico under the Hayabusa gimmick, he asked the FMW office, well, should I go under my shoot name that I've been wrestling in, for FMW with, or should I go as Hayabusa? And they go, we don't care. Just work the show. And so his thought process was he would work the show as Hayabusa so that if he bombed, he could go back to Mexico, work that gimmick, and then come back under his real name in Japan, and nobody would know that it was him, that they would have no knowledge that he would be the guy that stunk up the J Cup. He ends up training in the New Japan Dojo for a few days. He busts out the shooting star press. He leaves basically being like, okay, I'm not ready for this. I might not be any good. I'm not on the level of these guys, but at least I have the shooting star press, and that counts for something. And not only does he have the shooting star press, but he has one of the more iconic matches in Japanese wrestling history. And I should note before I throw it back to you, he's got all these FMW seconds at ringside, one of which is Battle Ranger, who we've talked about. He was a guy who mixed it up with the Michinoku Pro Wrestlers. When Michinoku would be on the FMW shows, we like his work. Battle Ranger, of course, on the poster that we just talked about, the first J-Cup poster, he's supposed to be in this tournament. So all these FMW guys, when Hayabusa gets to the back, they're patting Hayabusa on the back. They're going, oh my God, that was incredible. That was so great. You knocked it out of the park. Except for Battle Ranger, who, according to Hayabusa, was completely bitter about the entire situation and was a dick to Hayabusa because that was supposed to be his spot.
Yeah, and I think the Hayabusa aspect of this is like the special bit of brilliance in here, that you debut him with this. He has the match he has with Liger. He goes away, and I don't know how much you want to say this is Hayabusa's control of his character or how much of it FNW kind of treats him, but like because of this, then when they bring him back for good in FNW, he becomes such a big star to the point where he will end up being in that he gets tabbed over Tarzan Goto for Onita's supposed retirement match. Like this, the groundwork there, like they realized they had something, and I wonder how much of it was like, hey, we will see a lot of these tournaments kind of have what guys under one-off characters when we get into Fukumens. But this is an example of a potential Fukumen situation that ends up like making the guy's career because of what happened.
It's completely amazing. And then just to jump ahead to the fallout of this tournament. So this show happens April 16th. Hayabusa gets sent back to Mexico on April 19th, 94, and he's still not booked in AAA. Nothing about his career in Mexico changes in the immediate aftermath. Liger comes over to Mexico in May of 1994, and he brings a VHS copy of the Super J Cup with him. They would all then gather at Ultimo Dragon's house and watch J Cup 94, which, to be a fly on the wall in that scenario, I can't.
Ultimo definitely like burning a stogie, going like, all right, let's see what this kid did who talked my ear off this entire plane flight.
Well, Ultimo's there, and so Hayabusa got sent over to Mexico to work AAA. AAA they don't care about him. So Ultimo watches this show, and basically he and Hayabusa work out a deal to where Hayabusa jumps to EMLL, and he and Ultimo end up teaming in Mexico in 94. A little bit of that footage is on YouTube. I haven't gone through it yet, but I'm going to. I'm very intrigued by that. But they all watch J-Cup 94 at Ultimo's house, and Hayabusa starts laughing because the announcers talk about what a big star in Mexico he is. And meanwhile, he's like, I can't get booked. Like, no one wants me on their shows. I'm not a star at all. Nobody knows who I am. But Ultimo watching J-Cup led to Hayabusa being able to jump from AAA to EMLL and then teaming with Ultimo a little bit in that promotion, which he works through the end of 1994. The other thing about Hayabusa that I found to be so fascinating, I had never heard this before, Victor Quinones, who we mentioned earlier, he was booking Wing. Dave has a note that he, was going to start IWA Japan. He was going to be the booker of IWA Japan. And before they even ran shows, he saw Hayabusa work the J-Cup, and he offered Hayabusa a contract to the IWA promotion for $3,000 a month with a $10,000 signing bonus to become the top Japanese star of IWA Japan, but he turned them down out of loyalty to FMW.
I'm trying to do the math right now in my head, how much this contract was really worth. But for someone who is essentially like in that young boy phase for such a long time in FMW, I have to imagine with the way and that F&W was operated, this would have been like a maybe 10x, 20x kind of race for this guy if he wanted to do this, just because of this one match.
Yeah, very much so. Last note here before we jump into the show itself. Actually, I've got one more anecdote on the timeline here, but also it was noted that Gran Hamada pulled out because he did not want to do a job in the first round. It's interesting thinking about Hamada in the context of this tournament because, again, he would have been representing UWA, and by the time Hamada works J Cup 2000, he's at that point a Michinoku pro wrestler who has reestablished his legacy in Japan. Hamada weirdly doesn't fit in with 1994, because he's not working Michinoku Pro at the time. I mean, he's just a total oddity who would have made sense. And we always talk about the lineage of junior heavyweight wrestling and all the things that spawned from Hamada going to Mexico. But I would have loved to have seen Hamada in the show, but also Hamada, I think, would have been a little out of place here.
Yeah, especially like what would you do then? Hamada versus Malenko in that first, like where would you fit him in to
that
kind of?
That would have probably been the match, and that also would have been awesome. I would have loved to have seen Hamada versus Malenko
because like it kind of like ends up like the person, and it's not just because of the lucha background, but the person who's kind of out of place on the show in its one way is Negro Casas. So like I feel like Hamada you would have had two people who kind of stuck out like that, and they would not have done Casas versus Hamada there. So you wouldn't be able to have that. So you would have two kind of matches with guys who are a little bit off the beaten track, at least in comparison to the tone of the rest of the tournament.
And I guess, I'll jump ahead and just mention this here because you mentioned Casas and Ricky Fuji, but that was Negro Casas losing in the first round, obviously ages horribly, but that is because they were planning on Ricky Fuji being in the top of the Super Juniors tournament that year, and Negro Casas was not ever planned for that. So They gave Fuji the win in that show. And then I don't believe he ends up working that No, he does not. So that's funny. They gave him the win expecting him to work Super Juniors, and then he doesn't work Super Juniors. So that really ages horribly.
Maybe they watched this matches and decided otherwise.
They said, no, thank you. The last thing, and then I promise we'll review Super J Cup. Not that anybody hasn't done it before, but we'll give our perspective on it. We go back to Sasuke Soars, which is the book we've been reading from that has Sasuke talking about his life through essentially the Onita match from 1994. Obviously, there's Super J Cup stuff in here. He talks about being so nervous backstage because some of these people he hadn't seen since he failed his New Japan entrance exam in, 1989?
89, yeah.
Yeah, so 5 years later, it's the first time he's seeing some of these guys, and he talks about how nervous he was. And then he also says this, and again, this is directly from Sasuke Soars. I didn't get a chance to wrestle in the first round because I was a seated wrestler. In the second round, I faced El Samurai of New Japan Pro Wrestling, who I had also competed with on the Mexico tour. I was hurt by the submission technique, but managed to return with a Hurricane Rana and get the 3 count. In the semifinals, I faced one of the favorites to win, Jushin Thunder Liger. I couldn't afford to lose against Liger. Even though the attendance was increasing, it was still a struggle for Michinoku Pro. This match was broadcast nationwide and, of course, in the 6 Tohoku prefectures. If I lost, there was a fear that the Tohoku fans, who had already had low attendance, would completely abandon me. That would be the end of my game. I fought not for myself as their great Sasuke, but for their survival of Michinoku Pro. Liger's techniques were so powerful that it was hard to believe he was a junior heavyweight. Palm strikes, fisherman buster, chicken wing facelock, and a throwing avalanche man suplex, and a Liger bomb, and an avalanche Frankensteiner. All of his techniques were incredibly powerful. I was just able to return the count at 2. I tried somehow to turn the tide using all sorts of desperate aerial techniques, such as the Sasuke special, a Topikan Hilo from the corner post, and the La Cabradora to the outside of the ring. I thought the only way to win was to go for a big move. I jumped to the top rope and went for the Ultra Hurricane Rana to save the day, but my feet slipped and I fell into the ring. This is bad. For a moment, my mind went blank. It was a move that I had put everything on the line for, so for a moment, I didn't know what to do. I looked up and saw Liger standing there. I instinctively thought I'd just pin him with whatever I could, and before I knew it, I had performed a Frankensteiner. I hadn't calculated this move at all. It might have been the only move I could use to pin him down from that position. I desperately grabbed Liger's legs and got the 3 count. To be honest, I didn't really feel like I'd won at that point. I was so tired from fighting at full strength in 2 matches that I didn't have time to savor the victory. After the final against Wild Pegasus, it slowly dawned on me that, I beat Liger. In the end, I lost to Wild Pegasus and ended up in second place, but for me, it was a great result. My second place result on the grand stage of New Japan Pro Wrestling's Junior All-Star proved to pro wrestling fans all over the country that the level of Michinoku Pro is by no means inferior to other organizations.
And at least at the end of the night, he was the one with the biggest trophy too. So it worked out.
So it worked out. But an interesting point there. I mean, again, even with Onita's relationship with the media, and even with the big FMW crowds that they would have drawn by, 93 and 94, we'll see, Michinoku returns to a Kawasaki show here in May of 1994. There is just an inherent difference between succeeding in your jacked up super indie. And I know that sounds demeaning to FMW, but they never had the prestige that All Japan or New Japan had. And Sasuke,
and a lot of that was because of Onita.
Yes.
A lot of that was because of Onita, because Onita, being such a media gadfly, has him portrayed as the counterculture. So you, at least at this time, the counterculture cannot become the main culture because you had these overwhelmingly dominant promotions at the time. So no matter what Onita would do, and I mean, we're 13 months from Onita's, like, FMW's biggest show of their existence, it still was considered a massive indie. Like, it's just a kind of context that just he's never able to escape that.
And so you see Sasuke here succeed in New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it completely changes the trajectory of Michinoku going forward. And with that, look, there's plenty of other timeline stuff we're going to talk about after J-Cup and in the build-up to April 29th, 1994 for Michinoku. But, Mike, let's talk J-Cup 94.
Yeah, so this is one of those just seminal tapes that you will find a version of it anywhere. If you search Super J-Cup 1994, you will likely find everything there. But the cool thing is that one of the versions, case, has like the full-on intro and music video kicking it off there, and then we introduce everyone out into the ring, and notably, Sasuke has the biggest pop out of everyone on the show already before a match has happened.
I will never not be a sucker for pre-tournament ceremonies that for some reason are only done, and in Japan, and I guess Mexico to some degree, but it reminded me, I was like, why, when they do the Owen Hart or they do the Continental Classic in AEW, can I get an event t-shirt? Can I get guys out in the ring with track jackets, standing in a weird triangle shape that only Japanese wrestlers seem to stand in for
with
like
Dr.
this?
Martha Hart out there in her hat saying, like, we're here for this. Like, yeah, no, the pomp and circumstance. You had both Seki Sakaguchi and Tatsumi Fujinami there with Fujinami's old WWF Junior Heavyweight title. And that just instantly adds a level of importance on what you are about to see, just because of the sheer pageantry of it. Like, we really goof as a wrestling society the fact that Martha Hart isn't out there to kick off every Owen Hart Memorial Cup.
It's something I say in my own job all the time, is in order for something to be a big deal, you have to make it a big deal. And J-Cup comes across like a big deal from the start. I also love, anytime I see Fujinami on the show, he just has the biggest smile on his face. And it breaks my heart that there wasn't J-Cup 84, so we could say, I guess by that point he's even a heavyweight still, but a younger, more agile Tatsumi Fujinami wrestling in a junior heavyweight tournament. We never really got that, and that is a great travesty.
Yeah, because, like, he is just, throughout the show, whenever they show him, he's grinning from ear to ear. Like, you could tell that he bought into Liger's magic on this show, and it paid off big time. But we get into the first round. We only have 6 first-round matches because of the 14-man field. And we lead off with Gedo of Wrestle and Romance versus Dean Malenko, who is representing New Japan Pro Wrestling. Gedo wins in a kind of big upset with a rebound power slam. A little short there, I would say, for these first round matches. And this one kind of was playing into Dean's strengths, I would say, and Gedo as an underdog.
I had not watched a Dean Malenko match in forever, and had certainly not watched a Dean Malenko match in Japan in who knows how long. And this match kind of made me go, hey, you know who I like watching? That is one Dean Malenko. I enjoyed this for what it was. You could not, I mean, even if they wrestled 10 years later and it's, Gedo at his peak of his powers in terms of an in-ring wrestler, in 1994 Dean Malenko, the juxtaposition of those two couldn't be more drastic. But 1994 pajama pants wearing Gedo and Iceman Dean Malenko, it really is the perfect match to set this show off, because it goes to show how wide the world of junior heavyweight wrestling was at the time, where, I think five years prior, you would have had just a lot of Malenko types. And you see with something like J-Cup 2004 and the guys that were in that, it's leaning a little bit more into the trash bag pants Gato types. But here it all comes together, and it shows just how vast the world of junior heavyweight wrestling was in 94.
And I am not giving Ian Rotten credit just in general, but what this kind of reminded me of was when you would have like the Ted Petty invitationals, and it would be like, all right, so Necro Butcher's going up against AJ Styles. And you kind of had that kind of feeling with that. And it's interesting, and I think we'll talk about it more when we wrap up J-Cup. The path of Gato on the show and the way that he works and kind of performs is kind of like one of those things that's not talked about with Super J-Cup whatsoever. But in a lot of ways, I feel like Gato coming out of the show, and yeah, he's going to be doing stuff with Lionheart and then later into FNW. For him, who has been like basically scrapping by, working wing in Mexico, getting like this kind of run in a tournament that starts with this upset over Dean Malenko becomes one of the more like notable things, at least watching this show now 31 years later.
I would agree with that. A very fun match. I like the story they tell with Gato, who would have had, plus 15,000 odds to win this thing going into it. He gets a few scrappy wins. I would have liked to have seen what Malenko would have looked like in a second round matchup, though. This certainly created an itch to where I now have to go watch more New Japan Dean Malenko. And I know we have, I think we have one more Dean Malenko match in this series we're going to talk about at the end of 94. And I guess we'll have to see how that shapes out. But in my own time, I'm going to have to go back and revisit some of that stuff, because I was very intrigued by what I saw here.
Talking about someone who I'm going to have to go back and revisit, we're getting into this second first round matchup. Our first Michinoku Pro representation of the tournament shows up as it's the main man, Super Delphin, versus hot, angry young boy Shinjiro Otani of New Japan Pro Wrestling. He tries to overwhelm Delphin, but, Delphin just is clearly above all of this. He gets the win with the Delphin clutch. In case this was like an absolute blast, because you had Shinjiro Otani like basically trying to overwhelm Delphin in the start until Delphin finally starts estimating Otani correctly and then proceeds to murder him.
As we sit here in the spring of 2025, and I always want to note when we're recording this for when I have a big picture take like this, but in the spring of 2025, there seems to be a growing discourse of people, and I'm not even saying they're wrong for this, because I certainly don't love everything that happens in modern wrestling. There's a growing discourse of, where are all the tough guys? This is a problem in America and a problem in Japan. There's not enough tough guys. There's not enough guys that just look like they're in wrestling to kill people. And while I'm not as panicked as other people are, I certainly see the complaint. I certainly see the concern. And I watched this match, and I don't know if this will make sense, but because it's a very minor spot. But there's a spot where Otani charges across the ring and hits a low drop kick. He drop kicks Delphin's knee and then puts him in a knee bar. And he does it with such speed and aggression and tenacity. And you know what? I just want wrestling to look and feel like that all the time. Because in that moment, I was fully convinced that Otani was going to rip Super Delphin's knee off of his body and carry it to the back like Ricochet did with Zach Gowen's fake leg a few weeks ago on AEW. It was that level of intensity. And that specific spot really jumped out to me as going like, oh, I don't know if anybody's doing that. Like that felt really intense in a way that 2025 wrestling doesn't. So my hat's off to both Otani and Delphin here.
Yeah, I just really, there's something primal about the way that Otani kind of works, and even like his diving body attack that he does, like leading off, that is so appealing to me. And especially like that contrast that you have between him and Delphin, who really my big award of this show so far is that more people need to watch Super Delphin, and I want to have some more heels acting like Super Delphin. Like he absolutely could have just taken away Shinjiro Otani, and you know what? It would have been in his right, because he's Super Delphin and he's clearly above everything that he participates in.
Well, I'll talk about this when we talk about the main event of 429, but as we hit a year into Michinoku Pro, the two guys in this project who their stock has grown for me, it's Shinzaki and it's Delphin. And I like Delphin. I didn't necessarily care for Shinzaki before this project. Turns out I really like some Jinsei Shinzaki. Delphin is just, it's completely, I've had to reevaluate the way that I think about him, because he's a brilliant pro wrestler. In this match, again, very short, 8 minutes Delphin Otani, but 8 minutes of all action, a perfect blend of styles, a really satisfying match.
It ends up being, outside of Liger and Hayabusa, which is its own special thing, my favorite match of the first round, by far. I thought that this was such a blast.
Yes, I really liked this. I really like Black Tiger versus Taka Michinoku, though.
Yep, so that was our next and third first round matchup. Black Tiger representing New Japan Pro Wrestling versus Taka Michinoku of Michinoku Pro Wrestling. It's a swinging DDT from Tiger, getting him to advance, and it's a real kind of fun kind of contrast, like this match with the match before, because you kind of get to have reverse roles.
Kick off summer with Memorial Day savings at Lowe's. Right now, get 5 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. Plus, get up to 40% off select major appliances and save an extra $50 on every $500 you spend on select major appliances $396 or more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/28. Mulch offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details.
Taka, he is now no longer the bottom person on the Michinoku Pro roster, but he's still kind of playing that underdog role here against Eddie, who is just vicious. And his Black Tiger work is some of my favorite stuff he did all of his career.
Riki Choshu was watching this match backstage, and when Taka did his springboard dive where he jumps up to the top rope and then does the plancha to the floor, Riki Choshu looked at the guy next to him and said, "Is this guy an alien? I've never seen anybody do anything like that before." So Taka Michinoku got the Riki Choshu seal of approval from this match.
And hey, how couldn't he with that? But yeah, no, just you got to have a situation there where Taka, clearly there because they promised so many people to Michinoku Pro, and Sato is off after losing his hair, so he was not going to be booked here. Really taking advantage of that opportunity, and especially given how his 93 was and how he kind of turned it on late, nice to see him with under the bright lights really exhibit a lot of growth, I would say, from where he started the series.
You know, I said probably episode 2, because I think that's the first time we talked about Taka. I don't remember if he was on the first 2 shows or not, but I said in one of our first 2 episodes, if you only know Taka as either old Suzuki Gun guy, I know he's not a Suzuki Gun anymore, but old Suzuki Gun guy, or Asian caricature in WWF, you're going to be stunned at the reverence in which Taka Michinoku was spoken about in The Observer. You're going to be stunned at how highly I think of his work. Mike, I think some of the stuff you're going to see of Taka that...
Oh, absolutely. I know how great he is.
Yeah. That you either haven't watched in years or maybe you've never seen before. You know, this is now the turning point for Taka. It starts here because our next episode, Taka has his first standout singles match. It's in the summer of 1994. And from there, he's off to the races. And you really start to see in the newsletters the way that Taka is spoken about is a little jarring to read in 2025 eyes, just because, you know, it's a little like the thing with Ultimo. It's a little like the thing with Sasuke. These 90s junior guys, once the 21st century hit, it's like they lost all of their magical powers. And we've been dealing with old man Taka, old man Sasuke, old man Ultimo far longer than these guys were in their primes for. And so it gets a little bit lost in history that, hey, Taka Michinoku was one of the best wrestlers on the planet, and everybody thought he was. But we're hitting that point now with Taka, starting with this match through really when he leaves Michinoku Pro. We're now at peak Taka.
Yeah, no, and it's really kind of fun to see him on the international stage really kind of take the bull by its horns here. And another fun opener, I would say that we're kind of the next 2 are your lower end matches on the show, I would say, outside of one of the quarterfinals. First, starting off with El Samurai of New Japan versus Masayoshi Motegi of Social Pro Wrestling Federation. I didn't know until this match that Masashi Motegi was the innovator of the rolling German suplex.
So the frustrating thing with this match is it's so uneven, because when Motegi executes his moves well, they all look awesome.
His rolling German pop was great.
The rolling German does a great dive at the start of this match. The problem is that he also messes up a ton of moves in this match, and it's a real bummer. It's so uneven because Motegi has spots where he looks absolutely brilliant, and then spots where he looks like the weak link on this show.
Yeah, and El Samurai just kind of takes it out on him with that power bomb at the end.
Yes.
Like, you could see El Samurai getting more and more frustrated as his match went along.
It's a bummer.
Yeah, but following that up, we have Ricky Fuji of Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling versus Negro Casas, anomaly of New Japan Pro Wrestling. Ricky Fuji gets the win with the Tiger Driver, and he is by far the worst person on this show. Like, Ricky Fuji, I get it. Like, he works Canada and kind of is able to kind of work on that and being kind of the fun undercard guy, but he's always been dog shit. And he is dog shit on a global stage in this match against Negro Casas, who only does as much as he's able to do to make this work, I feel like.
Is Ricky Fuji the guy from this tournament who is still working the most active schedule? He's got to be. He's wrestled 31 times this year.
It's him or Sasuke.
But I think he works more than Sasuke does now. So
I mean,
this is going to be
got bills. He has a gym I know of that might shut down. So yeah, no, it makes sense.
I mean, I'm going to go through this exercise. It's going to be sad, but it's going to paint a picture of, I guess, Ricky Fuji's longevity. But Gato wrestles here and there, but Booker D. Malenko hasn't wrestled in 25 years. Super Delphin still wrestles, but not at the pace that Fuji does.
He's basically just a weekend warrior in Osaka at this point.
Yeah, we would have if he was just doing that schedule as a guy, we would have no idea who he is, but he's still Super Delphin. Shinjiro Otani sadly paralyzed, really awful story there. Black Tiger dead, that's tough. Taka is
He works a lot of the JTO. He's always wrestling.
I guess Taka's wrestled more than Ricky Fuji this year, so that Taka's got Ricky Fuji beat. Samurai doesn't work anymore. Motegi doesn't work anymore. Negro Casas is waiting to retire until he wants to put over Psycho Clown's son.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we talked about that on the podcast or not, but he's waiting to retire to put over Psycho Clown's son. So he's going at it.
One of the greatest workers at WrestleMania weekend 2025. Yeah, that's right. Nieto del Casas or Psycho Clown Jr. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So but AAA never runs. So he's not doing anything there. Liger's retired. Hayabusa passed away. Sasuke, I think, is working more than Fuji, or more than Delphin, less than Fuji. And, Wild Pegasus, whatever happened there. So, yes, I guess in order, it would be Taka, Ricky Fuji, and Super Delvin / Great Sasuke, which is a very weird legacy for this tournament.
Yeah, not to get completely sidetracked here. This was one of the hard conversations with Kings about, so what are you covering? And I had to go so there's this tournament, 3 people died who are a part of that, including Chris Benoit, and Chris Benoit wins the thing, and one person's paralyzed. And she's like, oh, that's dark. And it's like, well, the tournament's actually really great.
Yeah, hell of a show, when you think about it. So Ricky Fuji versus Negro Casas existed. It's a real bummer that Casas couldn't move on to the second round.
Yep. But then we had our final first round matchup. It is the historic first match ever under the Hayabusa gimmick for Eiji Izaki, as Hayabusa representing FMW goes up against Jushin Thunder Liger, of course, of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And Liger turns a flying Hurricane Rana attempt into a stiff power bomb and then dumps Hayabusa with a gnarly Fisherman Buster for one of the better early round matches and what becomes one of the most historic, probably the historic moment of the Super J Cups, with Hayabusa knocking Jushin Thunder Liger down with 2 kicks at the start, sending him to the outside, and Hayabusa immediately doing a Tope Con Hello.
So, like I was saying a little bit ago, I had never seen the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals of this tournament. I had only seen the opening round, and I'm not even sure I had seen this match in full. But if I had, it's been a legitimate 12 years since I had watched it for the first time, with no context of who Hayabusa would have been. Definitely context for who Liger would have been, though. I understand the historical importance of this match. It obviously changed junior heavyweight wrestling, changed Hayabusa's life. Liger benefited from this match. Eito would go on to do the Hayabusa spots 22 years later at J Cup 2016. I get all of that. This match is not that good. This match is a mess. Hayabusa is botching spots all over the place, and that's not an indictment on who Hayabusa is as an overall performer. I am stunned this match has the legacy that it does, because watching this with 2025 eyes, it was not revolutionary by any means.
Yeah, and I think this is where I kind of show one of my biases. I never was a Hayabusa guy, Case. And
I don't consider myself to be one, but it's also, I would label him as a blind spot, but not necessarily someone that I'm dying to see more of.
I feel like I've seen a lot of Hayabusa, and it is like how much of it is okay, the unmatched aura of Izaki putting his body through all of these things, and it's kind of the great Sasuke kind of factor about him, about crashing and burning a whole lot. And I don't know, at least when I had my come to Jesus moment with pro wrestling, and it was like I can't watch this American shit anymore, Case. Like when I had that moment, and I had the opportunity to really kind of take the time, I was in college, and be able to download whatever I kind of wanted, but Hayabusa never really drew me. I always kind of saw him as like this figure that, and it could very easily be the fact that, Case, I'm a generation removed from being someone who have been active in the internet, or whatever the internet news board wrestling scene was in 1994, the smart marks. And with that, Case, you have to be, if I'm one generation, you're at least two. And I do think that there is a certain thing of the moment where people who, at least in like the 90s and up until he got paralyzed, were watching Hayabusa live, have a different kind of appreciation than I think that we ever will. And I think that's part of it.
Well, look, put a pin in that, because that, I think, applies to this entire show. But it's funny, like, I would love to know your 26-year-old that watches AEW, that enjoys like a Gunther match in WWE. Maybe they're into the bloodline stuff, Roman's charisma does it for them, and then they watch like a big New Japan show or a big Stardom show. I would love to know if Sabu or Hayabusa cross over to their level of enjoyment, because like we talked about this on VoiceGate when Sabu passed. I enjoy Sabu so much because I remember watching him as a kid during his time in WWE and being like, oh my God, there's nothing like this guy. His wildness, even in that setting, really stood out to me. Hayabusa, I don't have the childhood wonder with, and I don't have any like early Japanese wrestling nostalgia viewing with him. So I was just taken aback. I expected this match to kind of be transcendent, and instead Hayabusa nails the first two spots, the spots that everybody copies. And other than that, it's a really messy match. It's not that good.
And I think like if you're coming at it from like this kind of perspective, what is good about it is cranky Liger, because Liger gets cranky throughout the show when people start botching, and yes, he plays off of that. And there's a lot of an enjoyment for me in seeing Liger basically go like, how dare you? This is like your big match, and like this. And then also imagining now them rewatching this in Ultimo's Hacienda Mansion in Mexico, and Ultimo smoking a cigar and going like, there still might be something with this kid. But boy, it sounds like
that. History proved them right. This isn't meant to be a takedown of the next 6 years of Hayabusa's career, because it obviously
absolutely not.
From an artistic standpoint, it worked out for the guy. But I just watching this match with no expectations and no nostalgia, or I guess with expectations but no nostalgia, I couldn't believe this was the finished product. I thought this was going to be something else entirely, and it just wasn't.
And I think that's also probably when they sent him to Mexico and he wasn't able to really kind of work a lot, you kind of get to see the proof in the pudding, like especially for like where he was, and then going away and then finally getting work in Mexico because of Ultimo. So like it very much feels like the rough draft of a guy in certain ways. But I think that the starting spots were just so emotionally indelible that just kind of go throughout the entire history of the Super J Cup, that I mean, Case, they might do a 40th anniversary of the Super J Cup coming up in 2034. But I know one thing that's going to happen. Someone's going to start a match by kicking someone twice, knock them outside of the ring, and do a tope con hilo, because it's now indelible. It's now a part of the fabric of this tournament, is because of those opening spots, and we just don't regard the rest of the match that shows someone who is clearly kind of flailing and a very frustrated veteran.
If shitting on this match feels like shitting on the Rolling Stones, where it's like, what have I ever done with my life? I'm not at this level. I was very surprised that this was the match that it was. I expected something else.
Well, do you want something fun now, Case?
I do.
Well, we're moving to the quarterfinals with Gedo after his upset of Dean Malenko going up against Super Dolphin and Michinoku Pro. And Gedo kind of beats the shit out of Dolphin until he takes him seriously. And then Dolphin kind of shakes it off. And Dolphin thinks he has this all round up. He does the swinging DDT. He starts to hook the legs for the Dolphin clutch. But Gedo turns it into a prawn hold. The whole entire crowd is in shock. And Dolphin is just stunned that he lost to this fill-in guy who now instantly is in the semifinals of this tournament.
I wrote in my notes here that Dolphin is, quote, obscenely charismatic, and it just goes to the reoccurring theme. Like, I did not know Dolphin had these gears that he was able to shift into, but watching him here against Pudgy Gedo, you would think that Dolphin is the one that kind of went on to rule pro wrestling from a behind-the-scenes standpoint, just given the sheer overwhelming charisma that he has. And Gedo holds his own. I mean, I love this match. It's like you said, it's various long periods of offense by either guy, and then Gedo steals the win in the end. I thought this was phenomenal. My favorite match on the show up to this point.
Yeah, just an absolute blast of a time. And I mean, you're getting some of that universal chemistry with these two, too. I mean, it was Crush and Monkey Magic Wakita 4 years ago. But you could see that these are guys who have a level of comfort with each other that if you were just parachuting in and watching the show, you would not know that Gedo and Super Dolphin secretly basically were attached at the waist, at least until 1992.
And I don't think you would know that that they were shindy guys. I mean, look, Gedo obviously has a look that's an issue at this point in terms of him gaining stature in the pro wrestling industry, but Dolphin and Gedo come across like major league wrestlers in this match.
Absolutely. And talking about major league wrestlers, Black Tiger versus Wild Pegasus is the next quarterfinal match, and this is where the show really picks up. like this is the match you're like, oh, okay, we had some really fun stuff, a lot of good times with Super Dolphin. We got to see the debut of Hayabusa, but Eddie Guerrero versus Chris Benoit in 1994 case, it's a great match, and Pegasus wins by countering a dive into an arm drag that looks hellish, and then immediately pins him to advance on to the semifinals, at which at this point I was not notebook on it, but I was 3 3/4. This was great.
3 3/4 for me as well. I'm entirely unfamiliar with most of Benoit's work in Japan, and I don't ever seek out Benoit's work, but when I come across it, I often enjoy it and have no issue watching it. So this was something entirely new for me. I don't really feel like I've seen any of his stuff in this context, and just to see, I mean, look, he and Eddie, I mean, they're both already insanely muscular at this point, muscular to an ungodly degree. Benoit more so than Guerrero. But to see their athleticism in this match, that's kind of something you forget about with Benoit when he moves into the 21st century, and he's so big that it's chops and suplexes, and he's kind of working like Kobashi, with the difference being that Kobashi had no knees in 2003, and Benoit, while banged up, was just too muscular to wrestle like, a junior heavyweight. You see him here really wrestling as like a proper junior heavyweight, and that was kind of mind-blowing to me. This match was a ton of fun.
The timing of Black Tiger's Ranas and this, at the right time, and the way that Benoit takes them too, it is peak. When I think about junior heavyweight wrestling before 1999 in Japan, this is what I really kind of think of, and it's just an absolute blast of a match. And the finish, a dive countered into a really hard arm drag where it looks like, oh, Eddie got his air knocked out of him and Benoit is able to capitalize, is kind of a brilliant finish in this context in 1994.
No, it completely worked. Again, it was really fun to see these guys who I largely recognize as heavyweight wrestlers, or Eddie in AAA in 1993, where he's one of the more athletic, smaller guys on the roster, but isn't necessarily wrestling an American or Japanese style. Obviously, it's cool to see him here just as a proper Japanese junior heavyweight.
And then we follow that up with the third quarterfinal and the first matchup of Sasuke for the evening, as Great Sasuke goes up against El Samurai. He turns a Rana into a sunset flip to win. And my big takeaway of this match, and especially when you think of the night for Sasuke, he starts off the night with his smoothest match of the night. And him and Samurai's chemistry working in Mexico really kind of shows. And Samurai is someone that when I think of this time period in the junior heavyweights, I usually kind of put him a little bit more back towards the back of the field. I think he has a given that Samurai had to go up against Motegi, who was botching stuff. He left a positive mark in my head coming out of the show. I was 4 flat on this match.
I like Samurai a lot, and I obviously have come to really enjoy Sasuke. I sort of thought as we started this project that I wasn't sure I would enjoy any of his singles matches, and it's turned out that I quite enjoy his singles matches in 93 and 94. I'll use this term later to describe something, as I want to expedite this review just a little bit because we're spending so much time on it. But
yep,
Sasuke for me market corrects Hayabusa completely in this match, because Sasuke to me is doing all the death-defying stuff that Hayabusa did, but he's doing it way cleaner. For instance, there's a point in this match where Samurai gets him up on the middle rope in an electric chair position, which I would have loved to have known what he was going to do there. And the way that Sasuke is able to flip it around and do the sunset flip powerbomb off the middle rope was so clean and so stunning, and the type of thing that was really more in line with the way that Benoit and Guerrero worked on this show, rather than some of the Gatos and the Delphins, the Motegis, and guys like that, who I don't know if they were on this level at this point. Sasuke comes in, clears house, and it's just... It's the perfect night for this guy, between the Samurai match, the Liger match, the Benoit match. Like even the botch in the Liger match, not to get too far ahead here, it all couldn't have worked out better for him. It's like a show of biblical proportions for Sasuke, and he had God watching over him the entire time. I just can't imagine this show going better for any individual than it did with Sasuke here.
And I think you really start off his night with the idea that what we think, like, at least for me, the thing that always connects with Sasuke as we've gone through this project is his humanity, and like the way that he is taking a beating and he's always kind of, like shaking it off, or like trying to be able to rise above that. And you already have a crowd that is amped specifically to see Sasuke, and you get to have him kind of do an underdog performance in 3 matches. And by the end of this match, it's... like, okay, Sasuke is probably going to face Liger after Liger puts away Ricky Fuji, and you're like, holy shit, he got through El Samurai. Is he going to get through Liger? And that's even before the idea of him winning the thing. So I think Sasuke's humanity and the way that his body is not caught up with what he does to it, at least in 1994, working in lockstep throughout this night. The other quarterfinal, Jushin Thunder Liger versus Ricky Fuji. In one of the most dickish ways possible, Liger does a flying hurricanrana to win the match, where he just basically brutalizes Ricky Fuji throughout like 10 minutes.
Yes, a short and sweet match at a time when it was desperately needed, a short and sweet match.
And then we had another one with the first semifinal, Gedo versus Wild Pegasus, Chris Benoit. Gato's holding on for dear life. He's going for it in reversals, but he's still so overmatched. Pegasus puts him away with 2 power bombs and a diving headbutt to win a sub 10-minute semifinal match.
They got me believing for a second. I'll say that much. I wanted to buy into this idea that Gato could steal one more match, and it obviously didn't work out, and it didn't work out for the best. But for 6 minutes, they had me thinking maybe Gato could steal one here.
Yep, so Pegasus moves on to the finals to face the winner of Jushin Thunder Liger versus Great Sasuke. We've already talked about the finish. Sasuke's finish was going to be an Ultra Hurricanrana. He slips off the ropes. Liger kind of taunts him for a second, and then Sasuke comes to, catches it with a regular Hurricanrana. Just a real, just like perseverance of Sasuke's will through this, when Liger turned up the dickishness to 11, started basically strangling him and tearing apart Sasuke's arm, which becomes a major factor in the next 2 matches.
it's a strange match. You know, it's a very good match. I'll call it great because I went 4.25 on it, so it's a great match. Sasuke's corner swanton to the floor is the
That
most
was gnarly.
it's the most insane thing on this show. It's absolutely insane because Liger's not that big and there's no young boys there to catch him. Like, it's just Sasuke throwing his body at Liger and concrete, and he does it in a pretty remarkable way. It doesn't, I don't know. This show felt dated in a really weird way, and this was one of those matches where I just kind of I expected it to feel bigger. I expected the finish of this match to have more in the way of it being built up, and I expected there to be a higher climax there. And I know it's just the semifinals match, but I thought it was going to feel more epic in 2025 eyes, and it doesn't. Now, look, it's still great. It's Sasuke again at the top of his game, everything going right for Sasuke. Even the botch works out in his favor. I personally believe that the botch was intentional because it all just worked out to such an astonishing degree. But whatever it is, it's a great match, but it's another match on this show where I was like, oh man, I kind of thought that would be different. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that.
I guess why this worked a little bit higher for me, I was 4.5. You really had Sasuke after smacking the back of his head on that Senton Atomico. That the idea that he rolls through all of Liger stuff, he eats the Fisherman Buster and kicks out, and the crowd goes insane for that because Liger's been spiking everyone with that, and he's had good success with that on the night. And I don't know if I necessarily believe the botch was intentional, but it does kind of, in a way, after you see now essentially a half hour of the Sasuke car crash, you do kind of have this thing. It's like, if he nails this clean, what is this guy? You know, like we just saw him like almost scramble his head on the floor, and this is after doing K-Bradas and all of that, and it works in a weird way. But yeah, no, it's an odd match in 25 eyes for sure. But I think maybe I'm just enamored by Liger playing kind of a prick, and that worked out a little bit more for me.
Yeah, it works out. I mean, look, I think everything they're going for here in this match is ramped up a level of execution in the Benoit match, because the Benoit match feels like it could have taken place in 2025 and would have been equally as great. You know, it is Sasuke throwing his body at a guy who is bigger, tougher, and stronger and has a more respectable pedigree and is working for a more legendary promotion. And Benoit, you know, just sort of has to deal with it. Like, he's just, every time it looks like he's about to bury this guy into the canvas, Sasuke pops up and throws more offense at him. And it's a really fascinating match in the sense of, like, you cannot kill great Sasuke no matter how hard you try. And then finally, Benoit puts him away with this gut-wrench superplex, which is a crazy move, and gets the win there. But the finals of the J-Cup is, to me, it was the one time on this show, you know, Sasuke versus Samurai is great. Benoit and Eddie is very fun. Sasuke versus Liger was great, but underwhelming. Benoit Sasuke, it's like rub your hands together, clap, get into it. You know, that's what I'm talking about. That was an incredible match.
That was really like just like the moments of like Sasuke going for it, and like there's a gnarly apron suplex in this. Sasuke goes for like his he goes for like a series of dives, and then Liger's like standing over him, kind of being like, get your act together, stop dicking around. And he's just not, his body just gives out. I mean, essentially that kind of becomes the story of it. And Sasuke puts together the match of his life, and everything that he goes for hits. Everything that is supposed to be gnarly looks so much more gnarly. Like this is kind of the match where I guess but the age is showing where like I have like a distinct memory of Chris Benoit before 2006 and after 2006. But there is that moment that you have watching this kind of match, and you go like, how many years did this one day take off of both of them after this match? But it's legendary. It is one of those matches that you also end up having the entire tournament out at ringside, adding an element, especially after the finish where Dolphin is like the person there for Michinoku Pro, first in Sasuke's face as he's crumpled on the mat, and it looks like he's just like talking shit to him, and it's just like, no, Delphin, you're perfect. Like you're making it about you even here. But yeah, no, this is really the thing to take from this is that throughout this day, Sasuke has the day of his life, and he still crashes and burns, but he ends up becoming a national star, and then later very soon after an international star, just because of this show.
The thing that ages the best from this show is not any of the in-ring work. It is the pageantry of making this show feel like it's a big deal. And it's, the thing that would be replicated in King of the Indies and then in the TPIs that IWA Mid-South did. And in some of the earlier bolas, again, they would have all the guys come out beforehand and introduce them, and they would have the trophy and this and that. It feels like something in the last 15 years of wrestling, when you speak about American wrestling and to some degree Japanese wrestling, that has completely gone away, and it's gone away for the worst. I don't feel like in 2025 Dragon Gate that an opening night of King of Gate or an opening night of Rey de Parejas has this level of pageantry. The G1 is so long now that it's hard on that opening night to bottle up that excitement, because these guys are going to be on the road together for a month doing G1 style matches. We'll see with the N1 this year being a shorter schedule, if any of that sort of like, hey, you're witnessing something really special and it's happening right now in front of you and you have to enjoy it because it's not going to be here all that long. We'll see if maybe that adds to it. Champion Carnival, the presentation has been the same for 40 years now. So
you know what place has one that kind of has it? Stardom 5-Star Grand Prix opening night.
That's a blind spot for me, so that would make sense.
Yeah, because they will have everyone come out on stage with full intros, and they'll bring out the past champion who brings out the 5-Star Grand Prix Cup that has like all of the banners for everyone who's won it, and it does feel like a tournament kind of start because it has a little bit of a pride feel with it too. Okay,
that works. That's what I like to hear. I would like to see American companies take from this, which is now a 31-year-old show, so I get it, This was sort of transition our way out of the J-Cup review itself here, but this is one of the most influential shows in the entire history of wrestling. And that might sound hyperbolic, but I truly believe that. Now, where this show stands in terms of how it holds up is a separate conversation. We'll get to that in just a second. But I reached out to John Muse, and I hope John doesn't mind me reading this DM because I did not ask him if I could share it, but I'm going to. John, I apologize if you hear this and you didn't want this out there. But I asked John, who was a tape trader, as this show was happening, what was the influence of this show in the short term, in the long term, and what was the popularity level of this tape? And I'll read John's response here, in which he said, my opinion on some of this might be skewed when it comes to impact because I was an early adopter of junior heavyweight wrestling. When I started getting Japan tapes, my immediate target was Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid. That quickly moved into Masawa Kobayashi and then Yamada Liger and then UWF with Hamada and Asai and Sasuke and so on. I was already a believer by the time the J-Cup came along. When I had control of a promotion, I had a singles title, a tag title, and a light heavyweight title. I like to think that the J-Cup opened eyes to the value of that style to promoters and fans in the U.S. and in turn encouraged the smaller and lighter people who wanted to wrestle that they had a place in this business that wasn't as welcoming as before. Obviously, Liger Pillman helped, but with the J-Cup, it felt like a bigger moment. In-ring goes without saying. The action had influence and impact because of how great it was. Things like that opened the imagination, and the tape made its way into the hands of wrestlers here at a time when we began seeing it on shows. The guy who was most over for us was Reckless Youth, and he was over within minutes, even though people hadn't seen him here. I'm certain that tape had influenced on him. On the tape itself, there were a few things that drove interest beyond the normal I like this promotion or I want to see Japanese wrestling sort of purchaser. First, big angles and 5-star matches drove interest. I chased every 4 to 5-star match. Then you would have things that caught fire or word of mouth that drove interest. These are things that stood out as drivers. Dynamite Kid and Tiger Mask, All Japan Women commercial tapes, Hamada's UWF, Sabu, Rey Mysterio Jr., the Liger Sano series, and so on. But then he notes that J-Cup fell into that group, and that this not only had great matches, but it felt like a really special thing, time and place, and that legacy has lived on. He then suggested that I reach out to Jeff Lynch, legendary tape trader, to ask Jeff if this was the most sold tape that he ever had. And Jeff said, this is my email to Jeff. I asked him if he had any record of what he sold the most through his time as a tape trader. And Jeff said, while I never kept any records of what shows sold the most specifically, it is safe to say that it is quite possible that first might have been Jacob. That might have been the best seller I ever had. Among others would have been some of the Wrestle Kingdom shows, the G1 Climax shows, Skydiving J, and some of the big All Japan shows of that era with Masawa, Kawada, and Kobashi. So without Jacob, we aren't getting the Michinoku 6-man in ECW. I think that to me is the biggest takeaway from why this matters to Michinoku Pro is this tape had such an impact on American wrestling in the immediate and in the way aftermath that it completely, this one night in Tokyo, completely changes American wrestling as we know it.
Yeah, and another aspect, I love John and Jeff adding in those points to it, like not just around like tape trading and like this. Think about the Americans and Canadians who come into Michinoku Pro very quickly in 95 and 96. Like, you are getting a lot of people, and yeah, Jerry Lynn worked one show as a part of FMW, then comes back later with this. But I think that an argument can be made, especially if you're looking at the indie landscape in the 90s, and especially like think of it as a American wrestler. This now completely opens up a new vein that of places to go to train at, and more so than really anything at this point, I would argue that this becomes like, oh, it's Great Sasuke's show. And then you go, where's Great Sasuke working? It's like, well, he actually runs his own promotion called Michinoku Pro. I think that there's a through line there between this show happening and a lot of people who later come in and work some Michinoku Pro.
Well, it couldn't have been more beneficial to both Michinoku and New Japan, because as we'll chronicle throughout 1994, they are desperate to get more dates on Sasuke, because Sasuke becomes a legitimate draw for this promotion in a way that I don't really think he's given the credit for in 2025 eyes. You know, some of the stuff that Dave writes about the Super Junior Tag League is pretty jarring in the sense of how well it draws with Sasuke on top. But then also, like you said, I like this Great Sasuke guy. Where does he work? Oh, he has his own promotion. Oh, there's an entire promotion of guys that work like Great Sasuke. I have to check that out.
Yeah, I feel like that maybe more so than like when we get to these days in 1996, like that is known as like the Michinoku Pro kind of show, but John and Jeff don't bring up those days. They don't bring up Michinoku Pro's own show in Sumo Hall that kicked that off. No, it really is back here in 1994, really starting us down that path.
You know, I don't know. I didn't ask, and I guess I should. I don't know if Jeff would ever come on a show like this, but I would be curious from the people that would have bought J-Cup on tape. Let's use that as the cutoff, as not somebody that bought the show on a DVD for the first time, but somebody that had this on a VHS tape. I'd be so curious to know what those groundbreaking shows were that felt like wrestling existed at a certain point before this show, and then wrestling as we know it changed after this show, because I would think those days would be one of those shows because of the 10-man tag and the height that that 10-man tag had. I don't know if they're like, I mean, I guess 6-3-94 is probably the All Japan show that people would have bought the most. I'd be curious to know if there were All Japan shows that really stood out, maybe ones that we weren't expecting. I'd be curious to know what the buzz was like for J-Cup 95 compared to J-Cup 94. Like, I really have all these questions. I don't entirely know who to ask. I do know that Dave notes in the 5/9/94 Observer, he says the 4/23 New Japan show was must-see since they aired in some abbreviated form most of the Super J-Cup tournament from 4/16. Based on what aired, the home video when it's released looks to be the hottest home video since the 1987 Summer Night Fever series. Thank you, Dave. That it perfectly encapsulates just what a big show this was and how hot this tape was when it eventually did come out. I guess go ahead.
I was going to say 87 Summer Night Fever series. Was that's All Japan Tour, right?
No, that's a New Japan Tour. Let me see what was on here.
I should have looked this up before recording. But...
As should I. 1987, I'm going to go to Fujinami's cage match because I'm sure he was on this. This would have been... okay, so this was Choshu and Fujinami versus Inoki and Muto headlined the Sumo Hall show. And Kobayashi versus Nobuhiko Takada for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Belt, Akira Maeda versus Super Strong Machine, Yoshiaki Fujiwara versus Kengo Kimura, among others. That's what you're looking at on this show. So big tape there, but obviously a huge main event. So that would have. Hold on. I'm dumb. This would have had the first night in Sumo Hall was the 10-man tag with Maeda, Kimura, Choshu, Strong Machine, and Fujinami versus Inoki, Hoshino, Muto, Sakaguchi, and Fujiwara. That 10-man tag. And then there's an IWGP Junior Heavyweight tournament on this show. So those 2 nights together would have been a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely. So 87 Summer Night Fever, Dave, listening that in 1994 does not provide a lot of context.
No, but that elimination match would have been.
Easily, yeah.
So I guess my final note on J-Cup, I want to move on even from some of the stuff on our notes here. I want to get to eventually the Michinoku Pro Show that we have here. I mentioned the term market correcting earlier on when I talked about Sasuke sort of being on the same show as Hayabusa, the market corrector there in the sense that, Hayabusa was this wild, out of control daredevil flyer. And I personally feel like on J-Cup, Sasuke did everything he did, but better. In terms of the J-Cup as a show, again, watching it without the benefit of nostalgia, I think this show has been completely market corrected by Bushiroad era New Japan, Wrestle Kingdom, G1s, Dominions. I think you are setting yourself up for failure if you watch this show in 2025 eyes, having never seen it, and you expect one of the greatest wrestling shows of all time. This is a very good wrestling show in New Japan. In the 30 years that have followed, that brand specifically have put on multiple shows that have blown this show out of the water.
Oh, easily so. Yeah, but this is the one that is everything before and everything after.
I agree with that. I see the influence. Like, I feel like I don't want people to portray me as thinking this show sucks. This show does not suck, but also it's not Wrestle Kingdom 9. It's not Wrestle Kingdom 10. It's not the double dome shows with Okada and Ibushi and Okada and Naito. Those are better shows than this. Historically, those are better shows. I talk about this all the time. I really struggle with the pacing of AEW pay-per-views. I don't always like the way they're laid out, but I've seen AEW pay-per-views that are better than this show. I think we're existing at a time now when people mention J-Cup. I kind of think that's become an outdated take. And I think if you're mentioning J-Cup as one of the great shows of all time, it should be knocked down a peg, because I think wrestling in the last 31 years, we've seen better shows top to bottom. It's a special show in the sense that, hey, it doesn't have that traditional Japanese structure of 8-man tag, 8-man tag, 8-man tag. Oh, here's a special singles match. Here's a tag. Now here are the title matches. It has the benefit of, from match one, it does feel like you're watching something special. But I think from an in-ring perspective, there are just better shows now.
Yeah, and I would say that if you're looking at this from a junior heavyweight kind of perspective, it's kind of prehistory now, just because of how much things have changed. Like, even in the 5 years after the show, like, just everything kind of changed. Like, first Michinoku Pro, then Toryumon, and then we see how the juniors now kind of, in a way, there is kind of like a unified junior style that has come out of the 30 years since then. But other than like the DNA being there, I mean, you're not going to be seeing a lot of people working like Dean Malenko as he worked in the Super J Cup in 2025. And if so, it's going to be in a promotion that kind of focuses on like that, just because this feels like kind of prehistory in a way, and it all evolves from here. But I think that with the generations, especially, like, again, I'm a generation out from being active at this time. Case would be too. It is not one of those shows that I feel like necessarily does stay formless throughout the times. Not formless. It does not say kind of static at the times, just because wrestling has progressed so much since 1994.
I would agree with that.
So let's talk about Oedo Burns case.
Let's do it. So for Oedo Burns, it's a much shorter timeline. I've only got a few notes here, one of which comes from the Observer. This is going to be from the April 25th, 1994 Observer, in which Dave notes that Michinoku Pro has booked Tokyo's Ota Ward Gym on 4/29 with Great Sasuke versus Jinsei Shinzaki on top. And then I want to read this excerpt from, again, Sasuke's source. This is great, Sasuke's book, when he talks about this show, in which he writes, after that, meaning the singles match, or I'm sorry, actually, he means after the J-Cup performance. He says after that, the Oedo Burning event at the Oedo War Gymnasium in Tokyo happened on April 29th, sponsored by Weekly Pro Wrestling, and it was a huge hit. Advance tickets were sold out within a week. However, this amazing start was not due to the effect of New Japan's J-Cup. Advance tickets were on sale even before the J-Cup began. I think the reason for this turnout was the success of the February Cork and Hall event, in which Sasuke said, we're going to Tokyo. The office received a mountain of registered cash. To my surprise, each one had a letter attached that said something along the lines of, I went to see the February Cork and Hall event. It was the first time I'd seen such fun wrestling. Next time, I'd like to see it from a good seat. Thank you. Or, unfortunately, I couldn't go in February because I had something to do. Next time, I'll definitely go. I'm far away in Tokyo, but I'm always a fan of Michinoku at heart. And Sasuke says that the first foray into Tokyo in February had a big impact on fans. And in the end, the Tokyo Oedo War Gymnasium event on April 29th drew a truly packed house of 4,800 fans. After that, the question was how to reflect the popularity of Tokyo in Tohoku.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the Shinzaki and Sasuke match was all built after that non-finish that happened in Noshihiro, but this was a big built show for Jinsei Shinzaki, and in a way we really haven't talked about Shinzaki in this kind of context. I'm going to take a moment here to talk about Shinzaki and his presentation and what would not get across if you were just buying the tapes. So as we know, Case, Shinzaki is portraying a religious pilgrim, right? Like he is coming, he is acting as a particular kind of religious pilgrim called the Shihoku pilgrimage, which is a noted thing within Japan on the island of Shikoku, where there's 88 temples, which is a very important number, not just in Shinto, but in Buddhism. There's 88 temples that you go to, and you do this pilgrimage on foot across the island, and it goes kind of in the circle. But when you reach the 88, you get, after you complete the pilgrimage, you get something called a Kechi Gansho, which is basically a fulfillment of one's wishes. How does this relate to Great Sasuke? Why, or Jinsei Shinzaki? Why is Mike talking about it? So in Shinzaki's presentation from his debut in the fall of 1993 through this point, Shinzaki, every match, they said, and now approaching the 45th temple here in Morioka, approaching the Morioka temple, and they treated each of his matches as if they were temples. Sasuke started to say, well, the 88th temple, I'm going to get a fulfillment of my wishes for completing it, and my 88th temple is beating Great Sasuke. So the 88th match for Great Sasuke in this happening was at Oedo War Gymnasium, and if it's not necessarily on all the versions of coverage of 429.94, but if you get the Gaora Champion Forum versions of it, they have a full sit-down interview with him and Delphin, and a whole entire thing of, and I have this in our preview clip that has gone up, of Shinzaki walking on his pilgrimage as they run through all the matches he's had leading up to it. So that was why this was kind of built and why it was Sasuke versus Shinzaki too. It was, yes, a rematch, but it was also more so a fulfillment of Shinzaki's gimmick as he also wrestles this match in all black versus his white in that. But just as we get into the show and the build up to it, I feel like that's kind of an important thing to know about Shinzaki versus Sasuke at Oedo Ward.
I think he should have kept the black gear. I think it looked really cool.
Oh, he looks like an absolute badass on this show. Absolutely.
He really does. Now, this is a 5-match show. We'll rifle through the undercard here quick because really I think the last 2 matches are the only ones of consequence. Yep. But Mike, take it away. You have the floor.
All right. So we opened up with Hanzo Nakajima versus Nahiro Hoshikawa. As we know through Michinoku Pro, Hanzo Nakajima is a former Leopardo Negro. He's in this awkward post losing his mask situation before he becomes all caps Hanzo's, and Nahiro Hoshikawa is still working his strong style kind of gimmick. This match is kind of okay. It's Hoshikawa kind of getting schooled a lot by Hanzo throughout it. Hanzo rips his knee pad off, nearly rips his knee off with a half crab, it was kind of slow, but then the finishing was really kind of rollicking there for that opener. But kind of what we've been seeing a lot from both of these guys in 1994. We moved to a tag team match, Taka Michinoku with Terry Boy. We missed Terry at Super J Cup. They're going up against Monkey Magic Wakita and Raya Del Negro. Raya Del Negro is a guy who has like 50 gimmicks, and he's not really that good, but he's in and around here. You get to see some nice Taka and Terry chemistry. They win with a double impact on Monkey Magic. Really, Yakashiji is really grown into this character. That's kind of your takeaway from that. And then we had another Wellington Wilkins Jr. versus Yone Genjin Falls Count Anywhere match. Unlike his other ones that I've been somewhat of a defender case, this match is unwatchable because they get so far ahead of the camera that you lose track of them as they're fighting outside of Oedo Warp Gymnasium. Wilkins wins with a choke on a balcony.
It's just so long. Like, that's the thing with those matches is,
yeah,
I'm having a really hard time breaking them down because, one, they're on every single show. And I guess there's a cultural aspect that I might not be picking up on with these.
Oh, they love Yone Genjin. Yeah.
They're just, the matches are so, this one's almost 17 minutes.
And you can only watch like 10 minutes of it because, it's awful, Case.
Not good. I enjoyed the 6-man that followed it, though.
Yeah, the 6-man that followed it, we had Kendo, the return of Sato. He's grown back his hair pretty quickly, by the way. And Shiryu. Sato and Shiryu look like, and they do a pre-match promo kind of uniting themselves against the Dolphin Corps. The Dolphin Corps is represented by Super Dolphin, Grand Nanawa, and Rams, who's better known as Rock and Roll.
So, obviously, the wrestler Rams, dressed as an LA Rams defender, is my favorite wrestler of all time. Go Rams. I greatly enjoyed this man, and what I've learned to bring it back to 2025 Dragon Gate is I have a real soft spot for lumbering oafs doing lucha wrestling, and that includes Gianni Valletta, and that now includes Rams as well.
Yeah, and especially in his gear, which it is a full bodysuit that's made to look like a 1990s LA Rams uniform, including the leg pads and the helmet, which is
this is my favorite wrestler of all time now. This is the gimmick. This is, everybody should be doing it. We should all just dress like LA Rams players and go about and do our daily jobs. This is great stuff.
Yeah, and we already get to see good chemistry with Sato and Shiryu. I'm not ready to call Shiryu good yet, but I feel like teaming with Sato has at least raised his working rate. Sato power slams Nanawa to get the win. This was a whole lot of fun. It dragged a little bit, but after like the undercard, we needed this kind of palate cleanser of Delphin doing Delphin things, just being awesome, just being a guy who raises his hands and wants everyone to cheer for him every time, and is never despaired when no one responds to him. I love Super Dolphin. He's my favorite case.
The pairings in this match work out nicely, where it's once again Delphin and Sato, and they continue to play up their rivalry. And then you've got Nanawa and Shiryu, who I think work incredibly well together. And then Rams is out there, and Kendo is kind of the perfect wrestler for him because Kendo is a lot of shtick and a lot of charisma. And in the most literal way, he's just sort of able to bounce off of the bigger wrestler. And so I really liked what they did as well. Now, you're right. It's a 22-minute match with about 15 minutes worth of action. There's definitely a lull in the middle of it, but it starts hot and it ends hot, and it feels like at this point we are developing, and this will play into the main event a little bit in how I think it differs, actually. But this 6-man shows that there is a definitive Michinoku trio style at this point. It's a little bit different than the traditional UWA trio style that they're cribbing from. It's a little bit different than how they would work in Universal. The Michinoku 6-man at this point is not how we all recognize it as Kaientai versus the Sekigun, but there's a definitive Michinoku 6-man style that is present as of April of 1994.
Yeah, and we're already getting to see the relationships with what later would be Kaientai versus Sekigun members even develop, even Nanawa and Shiryu. Like, they would have they would have hundreds of more matches with each other, but we're starting to really kind of see it. The thing that kind of got me was that they're, as a part of Nanawa, they have these special balloon streamers that they kept on firing off throughout the match. And just like every once in a while, I'd hear a weird And I would be like, is something wrong in my house here? Oh, wait, it's another fucking balloon. But yeah, Kendo is just like great in these kind of situations where they always have him being like the speedy luchador who outsmarts the buffoon. Like he might be the best guy at doing that ever.
Well, in veteran presence, by this point, he's been working for it. Cage Match has him debuting in 1984, so at least 10 years compared to, Sato and Shiryu, who might have been around for a few years but weren't ever really working in Universal, and then Nanawa, who comes into play in 93.
He's not even out of his rookie year yet.
Yeah, exactly. So, veteran presence. And I think the world of the guy. I really wish we had more of his footage in UWA in Mexico, because I think it would drastically change how we evaluate him as a historical great. But a really fun match. Bloated, which prevents it from being a notebook match, but I went 3 3/4 on this.
Yeah, I was 3.5, so I was right with you there. And then we had the main event, the 88th Temple, the great Sasuke versus Jinsei Shinzaki. Sasuke rips the start. He gets the jump and immediately goes headfirst on a Senton Atomico, and we were off to the races. And at least for me, I feel like coming out of like this 2-week period, this is as much as the Wild Pegasus match was defining for Sasuke in the national and international landscape. This match becomes really instantly super important because this becomes one of the few times that Sasuke has taken a direct fall since Michinoku Pro forms as Sasuke loses to Jinsei Shinzaki after 3 diving headbutts. And at this point, Jinsei Shinzaki has cleared the 80th Temple, and now he gets to have a wish of his dreams. And I guess that wish of his dreams is to work WWF.
Well, more on that in the next episode. But look, it's a fascinating match. One, they do the dives at the beginning of the match, and they both still have their ring jackets on, which is important to note because Sasuke doing a dive to the floor is cool. Sasuke doing a dive to the floor while wearing a robe is even cooler, and I feel like that has to be noted here. I mentioned, Michinoku having a house style for their trios matches already, and how it doesn't look like the Michinoku 6-man as we would come to know it. I think what's interesting about this match, and again, this is the rematch from the match they had in March that went to a double KO, which I thought was uneven, some selling issues at play there, some great moments, but some dull moments as well. Tell me if you disagree, but this match to me, and I don't think Dragon Gate has intentionally been cribbing this match for 25 years, but this came across like a modern-day Dreamgate match. It was big start, slowed down by a lot of limb work, and then a lot of trading moves at the end, and by the end, it's not the perfect Sasuke match. It's not the perfect Shinzaki match. They would probably still be better wrestlers if they were wrestling big trios matches or even big tags. But you know what? By the end of it, this was a great match. And it really reminded me of like a Yamato or a Shima style Dreamgate match.
Yeah. And I think what you really had, and the thing that really draws Sasuke into this is he ends up being, I think, through our first 5 episodes, my big takeaway is that, at least with Sasuke, he is one of the preeminent sellers of his time. And a lot of that is because when he crashes and burns, his crash and burn is usually a lot more dangerous than anyone else's. But there is just so much just calculated risk with him. We get a new version of the Sasuke special in this match. So you get the aspect of, in the big Dreamgate matches, of people pulling out weapons you don't see very often, like thinking about like the Schwein Red Line or like the Kobe World Liner, things like that. So you have a little bit of that aspect with it. And really what you kind of, at least for me, the first person to really put a dent into Shinzaki is Sasuke in that first match in March. And I feel like you do kind of get a through line where what does Sasuke kind of learn from this is like, well, my body gave out, but let me tell you the one thing that seems to work on this guy, and that's me throwing my body at him. So I'm just going to do it even more so. And then Shinzaki kind of counters that with dives of his own. Like he does his own Cabradora in this match. And it just feels like it takes it to another special place. Like I was 4 1/4 on this match. I'm not nearly as high as I am on some of the Super J-Cup stuff, but I look at this match as formative, at least for like the Sasuke mystique, as the J-Cup was for him 2 weeks before.
It's really a similar match to the Benoit match, in the way that Sasuke approaches it, where again, you've got a guy who's bigger and stronger, and Sasuke, his only offense is kind of to throw his body at his opponent. It's a lot of spinning kicks, it's a lot of dives, it's cross bodies, it's stuff that feels rooted in reality, where for Sasuke to get a takedown on this guy, it can't just be a simple maneuver. Like, he has to throw his body into the line of fire and take this guy down as he goes down as well. It's a very nice 1-2 punch watching the Benoit match than this match. I think they're very similarly worked, with the core Benoit traits coming out in his match and the core Shinzaki traits coming out in this match. I'm blown away by how much I've enjoyed the work of Jinsei Shinzaki, and I don't know if that will continue. Obviously, we'll get into the drastic career changes he has coming up when we get there. I was under the impression, I guess, that I didn't really think much of this guy as a wrestler prior to watching 93 and now what we've seen from 94, but he has held his own every single time he's been in the ring with an Onita or a Sasuke or Sato. Like, he's been excellent so far, and I just was not expecting that.
Yeah, and I think, like, we kind of looked at Shinzaki kind of like, oh, he plays like this character, and a lot of people kind of look at him like and couch him in that WWF run and have everything kind of relative to that run, but we don't get the appreciation of like what goes into that character that comes out in 93, 94, and the way that he works makes perfect sense for his character. So the idea that he gets like maligned as kind of working like the Undertaker, and in reality it's something completely different, and I feel like that, at least for me, getting a chance to go back and deep studying him gives me a much more of a deeper appreciation, not just of his ring work, but the character work and being able to understand and working as a character.
It's very impressive. Again, I think I had that Undertaker rep, and maybe, post 95, maybe he turns into that. We'll have to be the ones to judge that when we get to that footage, but he's so athletic and he's so charismatic, and he really delivers in a way that I just wasn't expecting him to in this series.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a big watermark for Michinoku Pro happening 2 weeks after the Super J Cup. I mean, 4,800 fans. I don't have our numbers for everything so far, but that's their biggest house by far to date, right? Like, they were just doing 2,300 at the end of last year in Tohoku.
It would have to be. And also, there's a shot during Sasuke versus Shinzaki when they pan to the floor, and it looks packed in that building. That is a real number. I fully believe that. I think Dave has it at 4,800, or I'm sorry, Dave has it at 4,500. Michinoku has it at 4,800. But either way, that is a very crowded building that sold out in advance and sold out before the J Cup even happened.
Yeah. So one of those real fundamental nights in Michinoku Pro. And as we move on in the series, we are going to, in our next week, there's a lot of stuff or in our next episode case, there's a lot of things that are happening with Michinoku Pro and the wrestlers around it as we enter May of 1994.
Yes, to put a bow on this episode, I just want to read this note from the July 4th Wrestling Observer newsletter of 1994, when Dave writes, "For those of you voting for Match of the Year, a must-see match is the 429 Michinoku match from Tokyo with Sasuke versus Jinsei Shinzaki, which was released a few weeks ago on home video, with Sasuke doing 4 incredible dives, including 2 space-flying tiger drops, an Asai moonsault, and a dive over the post into a somersault body block. After seeing matches like this, you can see why Sasuke looked in pain just walking to the ring." Now, a weird thing about this match, as I was doing some research on it, I guess it aired, or maybe the home video came out on June 1st. And the story that I read on Pro Wrestling Only was that Dave Shearer, unfortunately a name who is relevant to 90s wrestling history, that Dave Shearer is the one that sent Dave this match, that Dave Shearer would put this match on his comp tapes, and that Dave watched this and told Dave Shearer that it was a 5-star match. Now, Dave has no rating in the July 4th, 1994 Wrestling Observer newsletter, but I guess we have crazy person Dave Shearer to thank for the legacy of Sasuke versus Shinzaki.
Who would think? Who would have thought?
Who would think, indeed. So that is episode 5. Mike, for episode 6, which again, you'll get in about a month. I was looking at the calendar. I wanted to get one out even sooner, but I don't think it's going to happen. Episode 6 of Michinoku Pro, we are going to talk about FMW. We are going to talk about New Japan. We are going to talk about WAR. we are going to talk about the WWF. And then we will end in July with the Universal Reunion show hosted by Michinoku Pro. We'll get Gato, Jado, and Ultimo Dragon in Michinoku, and I cannot wait to talk about what's to come.
Absolutely. We'll be back with you next time with that edition of Those Days. If you want to support the show, as we said before up top, you can go to our redcircle.com landing site. We have a link in the show notes. You click the red box to sponsor this podcast. You can set up a one-time or recurring donation. If you would like to follow us on social media, you can do it both on Blue Sky and Twitter at Open VoiceGate. And the best place to kind of keep up with us is on the Voices of Wrestling Discord. There is a great Dragon Gate channel, but there's also the Open the VoiceGate channel. This week, or rather this episode, we're not going to have as much of a match listing, show listings, but in the future and in the past, that's where we post our match listings for each of these shows. This is where we get a lot of the fun conversations happening afterwards, and that's on the Voices of Wrestling Discord and the Open the VoiceGate channel. But that's going to do it for this edition of Those Days. We'll be back with you in June to talk about the summer of 1994. Take care, everyone.
Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-Star Match Game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
Kick off summer with Memorial Day savings at Lowe's. Right now, get 5 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. Plus, get up to 40% off select major appliances and save an extra $50 on every $500 you spend on select major appliances $396 or more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/28. Mulch offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details.